All right. Hello, everyone. I am Ava Davis with Out on Film, and today we are joined by Jules Rosskam, director of Desire Lines, which is one of the great films we're showing this year at Out on Film. It screens this next month, October 5th, at Outfront Theater at noon. There we go. Got all that out of the way. So, with that said, hello, Jules. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
Of course. I'm just really want to jump right into it because it's so fresh in my mind. And what was what was the impulse to create this film?
Um, yeah, I mean, the initial impulse was, being in a trans masculine person myself in trans community for over 20 years and just watching how many trans men seem to develop attraction for other men after coming out as trans and feeling for so long like this was kind of like a dirty little secret of among trans community or something and then sort of waiting kind of for years for someone else to make this film. I just kind of was like, I don't know. It was like, I was like, we have to be talking about this. This is so interesting. Why is this happening? Why is there like a lot of shame and around talking about this? Um, and then I just hit a tipping point in 2019 where I was like, okay, no one else is making this film. I guess I have to make it now. And then just sort of dove in. So it was like that experience that was sort of the jumping off point for the whole film.
I really enjoyed this so much because I started transitioning on hormones 5 years ago, and I was surprised at how it affected my sexuality and attraction. So this was really amazing to watch. But also, so this film goes so many different places, yet it's very incredibly clear and concise.
Hmm.
So did you have to create a script or treatment for something like this because you're blending narrative and documentary, and it's this wonderful hybrid?
Yeah, that's a great question. There were sort of, well, there was definitely a script for the narrative part of the film, and that was a very traditional. I worked with Nate, who is the scriptwriter on it, who works in way more kind of mainstream or traditional film and TV worlds than I do. And so I knew he would be able to bring that expertise to that part of the film. And so we developed the story together and then he wrote the script. And so that was very traditional, like very clear. We shot it in a very traditional way, which is very hard for me because I don't actually work that way and I find
Yeah,
it very restrictive. But
interesting.
um, the documentary and the sort of more experimental and the archival parts really all just kind of lived in my mind. So because I was also the editor for the film, it's not like I had to give an editor a clear script and say, this is what you do. My films always are kind of in operate in these hybrid spaces. And so and they're usually pulling a lot of different threads together. And I couldn't ever tell you ahead of time how they're going to work. I just know that they will work. And it's like, not until I get into the editing room that I actually figure out, like, okay, this goes here, and then we go to this. So it's really a process of experimentation, but also like intuition. Like I've just trust at this point that it will work, even if I'm not exactly sure how.
Isn't that the common prayer of a filmmaker? Like, we don't know
Yeah,
how, but it's just gonna happen.
exactly, exactly.
With that said, too, like, so huge fan of Theo Germain, like, had a crush on them for as long, like, for the past 5, 6 years. But also this then other actor that you introduced, the Iranian actor, his name, can you remind me one more?
Aiden Hakimi.
Aiden Hakimi. And so how did you go about bringing the two of them into this film?
So Aiden and I have been friends for like 20 years. We came up as baby trans in New York together. Aiden's also a filmmaker. And so Aiden has worked as a crew member on some of my films, and we've just like, been in each other's film worlds and then friend worlds for a long time. And when we were shooting a proof of concept for the film, because when I was applying for funding and stuff, people were like, we don't understand what you're trying to make. And I was like, ugh, you guys give me money anyway. And I was like, fine, we have to make a proof of concept. And I approached him because he's actually normally like a comedic actor. And I was like,
Really?
Yeah, that's his lane mostly is comedy. And I was like, is this in your wheelhouse? Are you even interested in this? And he was like, yeah, let's give it a try. So we like tried out the proof of concept and we both felt like it worked to work together and for him to sort of lean into that character. So then as I developed the script with Nate, for the full film, we really like, wrote it for Aiden and also without knowing, it was a pipe dream, but we also wrote the Kieran character for Theo. So we really were basing that character on what we thought Theo, around Theo playing that character. And it just worked out. And Aiden and Theo had great chemistry. Because, you can really like individual actors, but then if they don't have chemistry, then you're like, well, this is not worth it, or it's not going to work.
Yeah.
I mean, their chemistry was actually too good that I ended up sort of like shifting the story some. Because I was like, you can't actually hold back the chemistry. And so it was like their relationship was sort of supposed to kind of develop a little bit more slowly or something. And I was like, whatever,
Mm.
it's all
It
chemistry
jumped
all the
right in
time.
there.
So yeah. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's really wonderful to hear. Then, so you get all the footage together, and then you said you edited yourself. So going into the interviews, how did you go about reaching out to people, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so the interviews were the first thing that I shot, because, even though this is my community, this is some of my experiences, like I'm just a person. I'm not gonna like I always want to be bringing in multiple voices, multiple experiences within transmasculine community. And so I just put out a call, like I just like put out a call and send it through the networks and put it on social media. And I really didn't know because, again, even though I knew a lot of people had this experience, people really seemed reluctant in the past to talk about it openly. And so I was like, I don't know. Are people going to be okay? I mean, the floodgates open. People from around the world were contacting me. And, I just didn't have the budget to travel elsewhere, unfortunately. It was hard enough to just do it in the US. But yeah, I mean, I probably had upwards of 100 people reach out. And then I just, asked people to share about them a little bit about themselves, but also just it's really important to me that when I'm interviewing people, that they're getting something out of it too. So I really wanted to make sure we were kind of goal aligned or mission aligned or
Mhm.
so I was really asking people like what they wanted to get out of it and to see could we offer that to them, so I really wanted there to be some kind of reciprocity and alignment, and so yeah, it was just we interviewed maybe 2 dozen people and only I think 10 end up in the film. So, and through no fault of their own, they weren't bad interviews or everything. It's just like, as a filmmaker, you gotta make cuts. And sometimes again, it's about like how people play off of each other in the final edit, who ended up sort of staying in and who ended up not.
Okay, so with that said, because number one, it was really sad watching you towards the end of the movie drag
I know.
those people that you did not use. Like that was I don't know why that made me tear up. But also, how many of the in the movie there are texts where you have people act them out and then talk about what that feels like for each side. How many of those did you record?
I think we did 6 of them.
So there's
Six
more.
pairs. There's more. I know. I desperately tried to fit more into the film because they're so good. They're just really amazing conversations. Because yeah, we pulled people into the studio and they had no idea. I mean, they knew they got the script, these which were based on actual chats from Grinder and Scruff that
We've all been there.
yes, sadly we have. So they had the script ahead of time, but they didn't know each other and they didn't know. And then we just really had a spontaneous conversation afterwards. And so it was just so interesting to me what came up in those conversations.
Yeah, the first one, like that was uncomfortable talking about one person's reaction, and then the other guy was like, actually, let's go into the history of that. And that's really funny. That was your first reaction. Like I was just like, I had
Yes.
to hide under my covers. But okay, so I'm now kind of progressing more. into the documentary part, I know that I was watching it, and as the story unfolded and as you put in more and more of Lou Sullivan, it made me think about the trailblazers that came before us. And you could probably do a series of these with each one. But how did you discover Lou Sullivan and settle on doing or focusing and centering on him?
Um, I think that the first time I became aware of Lou Sullivan was in maybe 2006 or seven, through some of Susan Stryker's work. And I remember being sort of equally overjoyed at being like, oh, there's a transmasculine I have a trans sister. Um,
Love that term.
because also it's like there are a number of trans women that I knew about, that I loved and was so happy about, and I was like, but where are the trans, like, we had to have been there too. And so I remember being so excited but also so devastated that it had taken so long for me to hear about Lou, given the scope of his work and given how huge of an impact he had. So one is just that I wanted more people to know about him, because he's still, even though he's getting more known because of the book that was the edited collection from his diaries that was published a few years ago, called We Both Laughed in Pleasure. So a lot more people are learning about him, but still, even in the trans community, people don't know about him. Um, and also, he's a great subject because he has his entire archive is at the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco, and so I went there and read every single letter that was ever written to him. And some of the copies of his letters back to those folks were in there. That's where we got the letters from that are also in the film, are from that archive. And I just was like, it's unbelievable. Pre-internet, he was the resource. He was the person that people
Yeah.
were reaching out to. And he also wrote in his diary for 30 something years, pretty much every day until the day he died. And so there's just an enormous amount of information and images. And so it makes for good documentary material, because there's a lot of material there. There are a lot of, really interesting transistors that we know a little bit about, but we don't have enough information necessarily or images or documents or whatever to use in a documentary. So it makes it harder to tell a story about them that's rooted in documentary, as opposed to speculative fiction or something like that, which is equally important, just sort of not exactly my lane.
Yeah, no, that's totally understandable. And I guess kind of winding down a bit, one thing that I really enjoyed in this film was a sense of community and the idea that it's different in gay culture and trans culture specifically, and then also breaking it down, the difference between what we often see in modern gay white culture versus communities of color.
Mhm.
And I think what this film taps into was that there was a strong sense of community during the AIDS crisis and everyone having to come together. And now there's a shift. But where do you think these senses of community come from in these different times and groups? Such a broad question, I know.
No, I mean, it's a really important and interesting and huge question. So, I can only take up a little bit of it, but I think, for better and worse, oftentimes our senses of community, or our feeling like we're really rooted in a community, emerge out of moments of crisis, because that is often when people feel compelled to really show up, really come together. That can be, of course, it's a moment when people's worst selves can show, but oftentimes people really like rise to the occasion in moments of crisis, and understand that actually these people I'm in community with are the only people who are really here for me. And so that can really foster a sense of closeness, a sense of urgency, all of that. And I think that's partially why, this moment of the emergence of HIV and AIDS in North America, you did see amazing activism from ACT UP and other groups, and also just a sense of community, because you really are feeling unseen, unheard, unsafe in the dominant culture. And so we have to find these areas of mutual support and mutual aid, where we can sort of come together to resist um, a country that would rather us dead, to put it
S-
plainly.
Speaking of that, well, now that leads me to two separate thoughts. So first I'm going to touch on the other one, then we're going to get to that question or topic.
Yeah.
But how you can answer this two ways, through the film and through your own personal experience, but how was it transitioning into gay culture? And I know you touched on that in the film and it touches so beautifully and you get the different perspectives, but would you like to say more about that?
Sure. I mean, well, one, I'll say that I'm queer and I'm not a partner to men, but I'm attracted to all different people. I definitely experienced this like, oh wow, I am really attracted to men now after sort of transitioning, and that was really really hard for me, honestly, mostly from a cultural standpoint, where I was like the misogyny that is so intense in this community, the um, disgust expressed around certain body parts if you don't have a cis cock, frankly. Sorry, I hope I can say that here, but and you know that was 20 something years ago. It's different now. It's not entirely different, but I would have I would be at a gay male bar and I would be hooking up with someone or someone would be hitting on me and then I would have to come out as trans. And then the number of times where that person would then immediately shift to calling me she or express open repulsion toward me was high enough. It was 90+% of the time. And I was like, I can't do this. That like this is not for me. This is not, thankfully for me, was not the sole attraction I had. So I was like, I'm attracted to all people, all bodies. If these folks are predominantly feeling not cool about me being trans, I'm not going to go there. So I didn't step into a gay male bar probably for like a decade. And then I sort of dipped my toe back in and I was like, oh, wow. And then Scruff and Grinder came out. And what I like about them, even though they can be deeply troubling and people still send you really messed up messages,
Yes, they do.
is that it could just say that I'm trans right there. So it gets rid of the having to come out part. And that felt way safer for me. Even on like just like dating apps like OkCupid or less like hookup centered. I was like, this is just out there. I don't have to go on a date with someone feeling like the vibes and then be like, are you okay with the fact that like, I'm not asking anybody anymore if they're okay. Like, move along if you're not, you know? So I think, but when I was, you know, in my early 20s just coming out, it felt so hard, so hard.
I love that you touched upon that too, not only just now, thank you for sharing that, but
Yeah.
also in the film as well. And because for me, as a Black trans woman, it opened up a new perspective. And for whatever reason in my head, I was thinking, oh, well, if you're a trans man and you're attracted to cis men, then hopefully it's safer. But apparently it's just danger across the board. Yay. Um,
Yeah, sometimes.
so much fun times. So two more questions. The first one is touching on what you brought up, being a marginalized community in this country and specifically being trans. And I think that ties into the next question too, so I'll tie them together. What do you hope audiences take away from this film?
I mean, I
I,
think there's a lot of different possible takeaways, and I think it depends on which audience, right? So I think
hmm,
it's like for trans folks, and I think obviously we're not a monolith, like stating the obvious, we're not a monolith. That said, I'm going to make a generalization for trans folks at the broadest level, I guess. I want trans folks to see other trans people talking openly and without shame about their bodies and their sexualities and their just desire in general. I want trans folks to see themselves in history. I want especially
hmm,
trans men, gay and queer trans men, to see themselves within a larger context of gay, queer, male cruising culture, because that's a history we've been written out of.
yes.
And I want trans folks to see other trans people feeling joyful. And I think there's a lot of actually joy in the film. Um, and trans for trans love and desire and kinship. I think for cis straight folks, I'll say what I've been really surprised by at pretty much all of the screenings I've been to is how many cis straight people have come up to me after the film and been talked about how deeply that the film resonated with them. And the first time I heard that, which was at Sundance when we premiered, I had a couple people come up to me afterwards, and in a nice and genuine way, I was like, "Really? Why? Or what about the film? Because I was just curious." Um, and the thing I heard most is was around sexual repression and shame. Just like feeling
Yes.
like I was raised, I mean, we live in a sexually repressed and shameful society, but people being like, I was raised in a really religious household and there was so much shame. So just like they were like, it was mind-blowing just to see anyone talk about their body and their desire like openly and freely. Like it was kind of revolutionary. I was like, oh, great. That's so interesting. So I
Interesting.
think there's different takeaways, but there's some overlap too, because I think so many different people deal with shame around our desires, sexual and otherwise. Like we just don't feel free to live into our desires, and a lot of that has to do with how we were raised or the cultures that we currently live in. And I think going back to like violence around desire, that is almost entirely around shame about desire,
Yes.
you know?
Well, I have a quick game, if you'll allow me. It's just a little palate cleanser, if you will, but
Yeah,
it's called Quick Round. You choose between the two options. You game?
I'm game.
All right, mountain or beach?
Mountain,
City or countryside?
countryside,
LA or New York?
New York,
Yes. New York or Paris?
New York.
Fine. Night or day?
Night.
Let's see. Sunrise or sunset?
Ooh, sunset.
Okay, interesting. Books or movies?
Oh, I feel like I have to say movies because I'm a filmmaker.
Right. And oh, sweet or savory?
Hmm. Well, if I really could choose, I would choose sweet and savory, but
Right.
we'll go with savory.
Yeah, person after my own heart. And last, text or call?
Say again.
Text or call?
Oh, text.
I think that's the thing of our generation. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. And audiences, you can watch Desire Lines October 5th at Outfront Theater at 12 p.m. I hope you'll join us. It's a wonderful film. Thank you
Thank
so much
so.
again.
Thank you. It was a great conversation. Appreciate it.
Ah, can't wait to chat more in the future.
Yes.